8,000 people died in a single night. When the sun rose again, one of the wealthiest cities in the United States had been almost erased from the map. Entire streets vanished, families disappeared, and the survivors found themselves wandering through what looked like the end of the world. But the most disturbing part was not the destruction. It was the fact that the warning signs had been there all along. So how did such a prosperous city get caught completely unprepared? And why did so many realize the danger only when it was already too late? This is the story of the disaster that changed America forever. The morning light over Galveston, Texas, in September 1900, did not reveal the apocalypse waiting just beyond the horizon. It revealed a Gilded Age jewel, a bustling island paradise teeming with wealth, ambition, and the arrogant belief that man had finally tamed the wild fury of the Gulf of Mexico. Within 48 hours, this thriving metropolis would be wiped from the map, its streets turned into churning graveyards, and its population diminished by thousands in the deadliest natural disaster in American history. If you find yourself captivated by the thin line between civilization and total annihilation, consider hitting the subscribe button to Fact Harbor, where we exhume the tragedies that time tried to bury. Before the sky turned black and the ocean rose to swallow the island whole, the residents of Galveston were busy celebrating their prosperity, blissfully unaware that the wind whispering through the palm trees was the final warning of a monster gathering strength in the Caribbean. To understand the scale of the horror, you must first picture the city as it stood before the storm. Galveston was known as the Wall Street of the Southwest. It was a place where fortunes were made overnight, where grand Victorian mansions lined the boulevards, and where the harbor was so perpetually busy that it felt like the heartbeat of the nation. People flocked here for the sea air, the luxury hotels, and the promise of a future that seemed limitless. Yet, beneath this veneer of progress, there was a fatal flaw. The island was a narrow, flat strip of sand rising less than 9 feet above the level of the sea. Some residents had expressed concerns about the lack of a seawall, but those voices were drowned out by the roar of the economy. The experts of the day, including the United States Weather Bureau, were convinced that a truly catastrophic hurricane could never strike the island. They believed the Gulf was too shallow and the geography too forgiving. They were wrong. As the date approached, atmospheric pressure began to drop and the birds went silent. The ocean began to behave in ways that defied known patterns. On the morning of September 8, 1900, the sea did not behave like water. It behaved like a predator. The tide rose, but it did not retreat. It kept climbing, inch by inch, slowly swallowing the beaches and the lower streets of the city. The sky took on a sickly, bruised color, shifting from a pale yellow to a deep, ominous olive green. People watched from their porches, confused and increasingly anxious as the salt spray began to sting their faces. Despite the frantic telegraphs sent by localized observers who noticed the barometer plunging to impossible lows, the mainstream authorities remained largely unresponsive. The storm was coming, but the city was not prepared. As the wind began to howl, rising from a steady breeze to a shrieking gale, the true nature of the enemy became clear. This was not a rainstorm. This was a wall of water and wind, a thermodynamic machine of pure destruction, moving with a singular, violent purpose. By midday, the wind had become a physical force, knocking down utility poles and snapping the massive oak trees that lined the avenues. By early evening, the storm surge, fueled by the relentless pressure of the hurricane, began to breach the city's defenses. The ground beneath the residents literally vanished. In the darkness, communication lines went dead, leaving the island completely isolated from the mainland. The sound was the most terrifying part of that night. It was described by survivors as a low guttural roar, like the earth itself was being torn apart. Houses began to shudder. The sound of wood splintering, glass shattering, and the ocean rushing through the lower levels of homes created a symphony of chaos. Families gathered in the upper rooms of their homes, holding on to one another, praying as the water climbed the staircases. Then the surge reached its peak. The entire island was submerged. Everything that was not anchored to the bedrock became a projectile. Massive timbers, remnants of the city's grandest buildings, were turned into battering rams that slammed into the sides of residential homes. People who had sought refuge in their shelters suddenly found themselves adrift on pieces of their own roof, spinning through a black, churning nightmare of debris and human life. The water was filled with the belongings of a lost civilization, trunks of clothing, pianos, heavy furniture, and the bodies of those who had not been fast enough. Many were trapped in the crawl spaces of their homes, suffocated by the rising tide or crushed by the collapsing walls. There was no escape. The currents were so strong that even the best swimmers were dragged down within seconds. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the flashes of lightning that illuminated the skeletal remains of the city as it was being erased. When the sun finally rose on the morning of September 9th, it revealed a landscape that no one could have imagined. The city of Galveston was gone. In its place was a mountain of rubble, miles of twisted wreckage, and a silence so profound that it was more haunting than the screams of the night before. The debris pile was so high that it trapped the survivors in a labyrinth of death. The air was thick with the scent of salt, wet wood, and something much worse. The death toll was staggering. Within a span of 12 hours, roughly 8,000 people had perished. The reality of the carnage began to sink in as the living walked through the ruins, looking for family members, friends, and neighbors, often finding nothing but pieces of clothing. The logistical nightmare that followed was unprecedented. The island was cut off, with no food, no fresh water, and no way to dispose of the mounting number of victims. The heat of the Texas sun beat down on the wreckage, accelerating the decay. The survivors were forced to confront the impossible task of clearing their home while dealing with the trauma of losing everything. Martial law was declared, and the authorities faced a grotesque reality. The bodies had to be disposed of, but there was no time for traditional burials. They were initially sent out to sea, but the tides returned them to the shore, an act of nature that felt like a final, cruel mockery. Eventually, massive funeral pyres were constructed, burning day and night for weeks, creating a pall of smoke that hung over the island, serving as a constant reminder of the disaster. As the weeks turned into months, the survivors began to rebuild, but they did so with a newfound desperate wisdom. They realized that if the city was to survive, it had to change. The government approved a plan to raise the entire elevation of the island, a feat of engineering that remains one of the most ambitious in human history. Millions of tons of sand and sediment were pumped into the city, lifting houses and streets inches at a time, until the city sat safely above the reach of the tides. They also constructed a massive concrete seawall, a monolith designed to break the back of any future storm. This was not just construction, it was an act of defiance. It was a statement to the ocean that Galveston would not be taken again. Yet, as we look back at the photos from that era, the faces of the survivors seem to hold a mystery that goes beyond the tragedy itself. There is a look in their eyes that suggests they saw something that the rest of the world could never understand. They had witnessed the fragility of their existence in a way that stripped away all the pretense of their era. They lived through a moment where the natural world asserted its dominance over human hubris. Even today, if you walk along the seawall in Galveston, you can feel the weight of history in the wind. The city is vibrant and alive, but it is built upon the ghost of a city that was wiped away by the indifferent power of the sea. We are left to wonder about the thousands of stories that were lost in that single night. How many dreams, how many secrets, how many untold histories were buried under that mountain of wreckage? The disaster forced a change in how we monitor the weather, leading to the creation of the modern hurricane tracking systems that protect millions of lives today. We owe our current safety to the sacrifice of those 8,000 souls, yet the mystery of the storm remains. Why did it hit with such surgical precision? How did so many realize too late that the sea was rising? These are the questions that keep us coming back to the archives, searching for answers, looking for the human element in the cold, hard data of history. The tragedy of Galveston is a stark reminder that we are merely guests on this planet, and the systems that sustain us can turn against us in an instant. It is a story of human resilience, yes, but it is also a story of a vulnerability that we have yet to fully outgrow. We build our walls and our detection systems. We study the pressures and the patterns, but the sea is deep, and the atmosphere is vast. There is always another storm, always another mystery waiting in the depths of our volatile world. As we close this chapter, consider the city as it stands now, a monument to survival. But underneath the concrete, beneath the modern infrastructure, the sands of the island hold the memory of the night the world ended for the people of Galveston. What we learn from the past is not just how to survive, but how to respect the forces that operate on a scale far beyond our control. The story of 1900 is complete, yet it still resonates in every gust of wind that hits the Texas coast. If this deep dive into the shadows of history has left you hungry for more, please consider supporting Fact Harbor by liking this video and sharing it with someone who appreciates the weight of the past. There are countless other tragedies and mysteries waiting to be brought into the light, and your support ensures that these stories continue to be told. The ocean is quiet today, but it never forgets, and neither should we. Yet to understand the true magnitude of what occurred on that shoreline, one must look beyond the meteorological data and the structural failure of the city. We must peer into the psyche of the inhabitants, people who lived with an almost hubristic confidence in their geography. Before the storm, Galveston was not merely a coastal town. It was the Wall Street of the South, a glittering jewel of prosperity known as the Queen City of the Gulf. Its citizens believed that their wealth and their sophisticated engineering were shields against the whims of nature. They had built their structures with a sense of permanence that ignored the reality of a barrier island barely feet above the mean high tide. This psychological complacency is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the disaster. It serves as a reminder that the greatest danger in any catastrophe is often our own inability to believe that the unthinkable can happen. Consider the atmosphere on the morning of September 8, 1900. The sky held a peculiar bruised hue that those who survived would later describe as unnatural. For a population accustomed to the usual seasonal disturbances, this felt different. Yet the lack of a formal, high-stakes warning system meant that many went about their chores with a fatal lack of urgency. They were caught in a trap of their own normalcy bias. Even as the tide began to behave erratically, creeping up toward porches and swallowing streets that had been dry for decades, the initial reaction was not panic, but curiosity. There is a profound tragedy in the image of children playing in the rising slush of the ocean, unaware that they were witnessing the early tremors of their destruction. This transition from mundane routine to apocalyptic reality offers a lesson that echoes through the corridors of time. It is a cautionary tale regarding how quickly our technological advancements and societal structures can be rendered obsolete by the sheer unmitigated power of an environmental shift. When the eye of the storm finally unleashed its fury, the wind turned the city into a kinetic weapon. Roofs became projectile, and the very foundation of the island, the sand that defined their existence, began to liquefy under the pressure of the surge. It is difficult for us, in our modern era, to fully grasp the sensory overload that the victims experienced. We live in an age of filtered information, where disasters are viewed through the safety of high-definition screens. We are observers, detached by distance and technology. But for those on the ground in 1900, there was no detachment. There was the deafening roar of the gale, a sound described by survivors as akin to 1,000 freight trains passing through their living rooms. There was the smell of salt and pulverized timber, the taste of grit in the air, and the absolute, smothering darkness that rendered navigation impossible. To walk through the city in the days afterward was to walk through a grotesque sculpture gallery of human suffering and architectural ruin. This leads us to an often overlooked aspect of the recovery, the psychological toll on those who were tasked with the grim reality of the aftermath. The sheer number of fatalities overwhelmed the logistics of burial. In a time before modern sanitation and forensic science, the city was forced to contend with the impossible. The decision to bury the dead at sea, only for the bodies to be returned by the tides, is a horror that sits heavy in the historical record. It forces us to confront the limitations of our mercy. When the earth and the sea refuse to provide a final resting place, the dignity of the victim is stripped away, leaving the survivors to deal with a trauma that transcends the immediate loss of property and kin. It is here that the resilience of the Galveston survivors truly shines. They did not abandon the island. They chose to rebuild, not just by stacking bricks, but by literally elevating their entire city. The raising of Galveston is perhaps one of the most audacious engineering feats in American history. It remains a testament to the fact that while we cannot stop the hurricane, we can alter our relationship with it. By sand pumping millions of tons of fill beneath the existing buildings, they essentially pushed the city into the sky. Yet, even this act of defiance was a form of negotiation with the ocean. It was an acknowledgement that they would remain in the path of the beast, but they would do so on their own terms. This specific brand of stubbornness is part of the American fabric. We see it in the way we rebuild after wildfires, in how we construct levees against rising rivers, and in how we continue to inhabit the margins of a volatile planet. But we must ask ourselves, is this resilience? Or is it a refusal to accept the boundaries of our environment? As we reflect on these events, we are reminded that history is not a static object sitting on a shelf. It is a living, breathing entity that changes based on where we stand. If we look at the 1900 storm through the lens of modern climate science, we see a precursor to the challenges of the 21st century. Rising sea levels and the increasing frequency of high-intensity weather events mean that the vulnerabilities experienced by those Galveston residents are becoming more universal. We are all living on barrier islands of some sort, physically or metaphorically. The interconnectedness of our global infrastructure means that a failure in one region has cascading effects across the globe. The economic collapse of Galveston rippled outward, shifting the trajectory of regional trade and forcing Houston to rise as the dominant port city. A storm, as it turns out, is not just a meteorological event, it is a catalyst for historical redirection. It is easy to focus on the numbers, the 8,000 dead, the massive property damage, the millions of dollars lost. But the true story lies in the micro-narratives. It lies in the untold stories of the immigrants who had come to the island with dreams of a better life, only to find their path blocked by the wrath of the Gulf. It lies in the letters written by survivors to distant relatives, filled with a frantic, stuttering prose that struggles to articulate the impossible. These documents are the true artifacts of the storm. They provide the human texture that the cold statistics lack. They remind us that history is made of individual heartbeats, each one valuable, each one fragile, and each one susceptible to the sudden, violent shifts of the world around us. As we look toward the future, we continue to develop sophisticated models to predict these events. We have satellites that watch the oceans from the silence of space, tracking the birth of cyclones from the moment they are merely a cluster of storms off the coast of Africa. We have refined our evacuation protocols and our communication systems. And yet, there is a lingering humility that we must maintain. No matter how advanced our sensors, no matter how precise our predictive algorithm, the environment remains a chaotic system. It is a complex, non-linear reality that can surprise even the most prepared among us. The ghost of the 1900 storm serves as a permanent sentinel, watching over our modern complacency. It whispers that we are only as safe as we are vigilant, and that our structures, no matter how high we lift them, are ultimately subject to the judgment of time and tide. We have explored the physical wreckage, the psychological aftermath, and the long-term historical consequences of the Galveston tragedy. We have seen how a single night of fury can rewrite the story of a nation. But the most important takeaway is this: the storm did not just destroy a city. It birthed a new understanding of our vulnerability. It forced us to confront the fact that we are not the masters of our environment, but rather its stewards, often failing, occasionally succeeding, but always living in a delicate balance. The archives of Galveston are open for those who wish to learn, but the lessons are not found in the textbooks alone. They are found in the wind, in the rise of the tides, and in the quiet resolve of those who choose to live in the shadow of the sea. As this deep dive draws to a close, let the silence that follows the story serve as a moment of reflection. The waters are calm for now, reflecting the vast, indifferent sky. The city of Galveston thrives, a beacon of human tenacity on the edge of the abyss. But look closely at the horizon. The clouds are always moving, the pressures are always shifting, and the history we think is behind us is often just waiting to repeat its lessons in a new, perhaps more challenging form. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the archives of the past. If you found resonance in this exploration of the 1900 hurricane, remember that your curiosity is the engine that keeps these stories alive. Share this history, ponder its implications, and keep looking for the truth in the wreckage of yesterday. The world continues to turn, the oceans continue to churn, and as long as there are stories to be told, we will be here to tell them. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never forget the weight of the water that shaped our world.